members of his peace panel. At this point, may I now invite Dean Leonen to introduce the members of his panel and as well as to deliver an opening remarks.
Good afternoon, friends. I think we've met some of you a few months ago, and it was also in that occasion that we have explained the strategies of government in relation to this existing peace process. But first, I'd like to introduce the other people with me today, members of our panel. Of course, to my right is Professor Ie Coronel Ferrer, and then to the left of the ambassador is Undersecretary Yasmin Busman Lao, and then to the right of Professor Ie is former Secretary Senen Bacani, formerly of the Department of Agriculture, also in our panel, and then to the left of Yas is Dr. Hamid Lara. We have with us today also present and were our consultants during the negotiations are the senior military and senior police advisor of the panel. So we have a senior military advisor. This is General Ferrer, reporting directly to the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And then, of course, to our extreme right is General Noel de los Reyes, also reporting directly to the Chief of the Philippine National Police. What I will do would be maybe to make some remarks, and this is a statement that I read the closing ceremonies of the 32nd Formal Exploratory Talks. The GPH welcomes the agreed text on the 2012 Framework Agreement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, a product of serious and passionate negotiations between the parties. The government panel engaged in earnest negotiations with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, keeping to its mandate to conduct negotiations within the following parameters. First, the Constitution. Second, the experiences and lessons learned from past negotiations with the MNLF as well as with the MILF and the ARMM. Third, the government's ability to deliver politically, economically, and socially commitments that could be made and signed at the negotiating table. Fourth, the sentiment of the general public as far as practicable. Fifth, government's policy on peace efforts. And sixth, the policy of the administration to continue sincere and open dialogues not only with the MILF, but also with all sectors affected by the negotiating process. The document embodies the framework of a comprehensive negotiated political settlement that has been the primary objective in these negotiations. With this agreement, what we seek to entrench are inclusive and people-driven outcomes and processes. Indeed, the entire concept of a framework agreement is to bring affected stakeholders together to decide on the future of the Bangsamoro. In the April 2012 decision points, the parties announced their consensus to work towards the creation of a new autonomous political entity to replace the current autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. In this framework agreement, we elaborate on the nature of this new autonomous political entity and the roadmap for its creation and the foundational principles and values that inspire its creation. The new autonomous political entity will be created through an organic act drafted by a transition commission, enacted by our Congress, and effective upon the ratification in a plebiscite of all peoples that are affected by it. This is consistent with the objective to ensure a democratic and accountable structure of governance, not only reflective of the collective aspirations of its constituents, but also responsive to the political, social, and economic needs of its communities. On the premise that it is by providing that space for self-governance, can people truly maximize their potentials and develop their political, economic, social, and cultural institutions. This agreement also ensures vested property rights, recognizes basic rights of citizens, including the group or collective rights of minorities and indigenous peoples. In this agreement, fundamental principles on normalization are also laid out, including the commitment of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front to gradual decommissioning, as well as the commitment on the gradual transfer of law enforcement functions in the area from the Armed Forces of the Philippines to a reformed police. The parties are fully cognizant of the situation on the ground as it negotiated the text on the principles on normalization. We acknowledge Today we are approaching a new beginnings because the truth is that our work does not end here. It has become more complicated. There are still details that need to be fleshed out and more decision points that need to be made, such as the matters to be included in the annexes on power sharing, wealth sharing, and normalization. Indeed, the parties have committed to work further on the details in the context of the present document and finalize the entire agreement by the end of the year. Moreover, it is perhaps short of being truthful and sincere to claim that a signed document can definitely settle and cure social ills and decades of struggle. Rather, to be more accurate, we acknowledge that we will start the stage of implementation. It is meant to start of a process of building a partnership, imbibing trust, empowering peoples, and delivering social justice and effective social governance. The government acknowledges the significance of the document. It signals the start of that partnership between the national government and the Bangsamoro towards a transformation of governance in the area with the ultimate goal of delivering justice and improving the quality of lives of our citizens there. Our panel is now ready to take your questions.
Could you give us more details on what exactly was agreed on wealth and power sharing? How much has been agreed and how much still has to be negotiated in that area, in those areas? To what extent did you agree on specifics?
On wealth sharing, may I ask Secretary Bacani to answer those questions.
Basically, on the wealth sharing, we have agreed on the principles that would result in a just and equitable share in the exploration, utilization, and development of natural resources found in the area. We still have to go through the details in terms of exact numbers, in terms of wealth sharing. This will have to be found in the annex to the agreement. We also have principles on having a broad framework for sustainable development in the conservation and utilization of the resources. At the same time, some delegation which would have to be defined later on in terms of how to raise revenues, taxes, and fees. So in a way, in this agreement, these are just principles and establishing the broad frameworks for some detailed discussions later on sharing of resources. Those will have to be contained in an annex which we hope to complete by the end of the year.
Well, how confident are you that then there could still be, that there aren't any major obstacles left, that those discussions could bring up new obstacles? Because it's very broad, you know, just and equitable is very
I think there is general agreement on those. The numbers, I think, I don't see too much of a problem in arriving at any numbers which we will discuss later on.
Can I ask Professor Ia to give you a briefing on what was agreed upon in terms of power sharing?
Thank you very much. The power sharing provisions provide for 3 sets of list of powers. The first set will be powers that shall be reserved to the national government, and these would naturally include foreign affairs, defense, and several other elements. The second list will be will cover what we have framed as concurrent powers, powers that will be shared by both the central government and the Bangsamoro entity, and powers that are to be devolved or are to be exclusive to the new political entity. The details of those lists are still being worked out by our technical working group, our joint technical working groups on power sharing. There's also general consensus that there shall be a plural justice system within the Bangsamoro entity, which will be reflective of the diversity of the peoples in that region. Of course, the matter of Sharia courts, indigenous dispute resolution systems, as well as our local civil courts that are part of the national legal system. Other than that, the rest are details that will still be fleshed out. But at the level of the working group, they do have a very good list of consensus points, and there remain a few unresolved items. on the matter of redistribution of powers.
Sir, did you talk about the disarmament of the guerrilla forces?
Yes, there was a discussion, and in the framework agreement, there are clear principles that will guide further discussion. So I think it is the first time that the MILF has succeeded that they will be decommissioning their forces. And also on the part of the government, we are acknowledging that the armed forces will have to transfer its current law enforcement functions to the police. And there is also recognition that there is a lot to be done within that particular area in the sense of other armed groups and the partnership that can be done by the two parties. We are building on the ceasefire mechanisms, which will allow both sides to cooperate and as partners to try to bring in better security conditions in that particular area. How confident are we that there will be no further obstacles? Well, there will be obstacles, that's definite, in terms of any peace process, especially in terms of the implementation. But I think what this document the milestone that we are now passing through is one where the parties are given hope. And both the MILF and government now are on the same page, in fact have the same document, which has a roadmap towards which there can be full, we call it normalization in terms of that particular area. There is high hopes that both the MI and this current administration will be able to comply with their own promises. We had an agreement this early because this current government has committed not only to sign a framework agreement and finish, of course, the entire comprehensive agreement at that, but to start its implementation and have it assessed before it turns over the administration in 2016.
So, when do you expect them to be decommissioned?
There are, of course, some points that have been discussed in relation to the timetable, but the specifics of the timetable, of course, will still be negotiated in an annex. What is important is that both sides know the direction of what will happen with security forces on the ground. So it will be the national government maintaining its sovereignty, maintaining its territory, the creation of a new autonomous political entity with the name Bangsamoro, and of course the participation of the people in terms of crafting a political, the basic Bangsamoro basic law that shall guide the formation of the new government. Yes, ma'am.
The agreement has not been signed yet. Why and when will it be signed?
Because of the commitment of the government that it is going to publish any major agreement that it signs with the Islamic Liberation Front. We are looking at October 15 of this year to sign the agreement.
Sir, can you find out how big this region will be? I mean, are there new villages? How many villages will be added on to the current area? And do you give us an idea how large the area?
Can we ask Dr. Barra to answer that question?
The territory of the new political entity known as Bangsamoro will have its core territory, the present ERMM territory, that's the present arm, and other areas which opted to vote for the arm during the 2011 plebiscite. But all of these areas will be subjected to ratify the basic law upon which the after passage of which by the Congress of the Philippines. So there is, while the area is there, with the core area of the arm and other areas which opt to do it and which had opted to do it before, but were not now included, there is the necessity of the constitutional processes of plebiscite.
It is 5 provinces, 3 cities, plus 6 municipalities in Lanao Norte, plus barangays in 6 municipalities in North Cotabato, and all of which shall be given the chance to vote whether or not they want to join this entity in 2015, more or less.
Sir, may I ask you why is the MILF not present with you here?
Because they had to catch their own flight in terms of the negotiation. You know, we extended by 2 days. And of course, the MILF would also want to go home to address their own constituents. And for the government of the Republic of the Philippines, we thought that the first press conference that our panel should meet should be the international press while we are here. We had a joint communique with the MILF, and I think that suffices for purposes of showing that we are united in this effort.
What's going to be the role of the MNLF in this? Are they going to have a sort of a joint administrative role with the MILF, and were they fully included in the process? And another question regarding different groups is, what about these other armed groups in the south? For example, Tawi-Tawi, who I think they're a bit uneasy maybe about this whole deal. Are they going to feel included in this?
With the Moro National Liberation Front, there have been discussions between the MILF and the MNLF regarding their participation. As far as government is concerned, there is a separate table talking to the MNLF, and of course, the government's commitments to the MILF includes complying with its commitments with the MNLF. So the agreement creates a transition commission which will draft the basic law and then give it to Congress and which recommends it to Congress. In the Transition Commission, there will be seats for government, and government will certainly take into consideration some MNLF leaders in terms of filling in its own seat. We do hope that the MILF, in terms of being inclusive, and they are committed to becoming inclusive and participative, will also include others that are not organic to the MILF but sympathetic to their basic goals and ideals. Now, other armed groups in the area, lawless elements remain lawless elements. The law enforcement shall be implemented against them. The Bangsamoro, the so-called Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters, is now the object of law enforcement actions, not only by the governments, police, and military. The MILF has supported the operations of the MILF, of the Philippine National Police and the AFP regarding this group of Ustads Abdul Umbracado. I am not sure whether there is an armed group in Tawi-Tawi. There is none. But of course, I think what you are mentioning is that there are some political leaders that have expressed criticism. As a matter of fact, we have a united voice in terms of the governors of the ARMM in support of the current peace process. The Abu Sayyaf, Jemaah Islamiyah, these are groups that are lawless in nature, and the government has no intention to hold negotiations with them. They are lawless elements and they shall be subject to law enforcement actions.
Does the agreement spell out the transitional measures?
Yes. The transitional measures are as follows. There is acknowledgement that in 2013, elections will happen in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. Still, the ARMM, the old or organic act still applies. Immediately after the signing of the framework agreement, there will be an executive order that will be issued creating a transition commission. The commission's role is to craft a Bangsamoro basic law involving the public as much as possible. It will then submit its draft to Congress, who will then pass a law. And by our constitution, this law needs to be approved by the President and then submitted to the people for ratification. And if we have committed to the MILF that this should happen before the end of the current administration, just to make sure that there is actually a Bangsamoro basic law. Thereafter, regular elections will happen in 2016, but with a new institution, a ministerial form of government within an autonomous entity in Mindanao, and regular elections shall happen in 2016. Along with that timetable, I think the decommissioning and the redeployment activities will also keep a pace with that development.
So to clarify, you said that there are discussions with MNLF whether they want to join this.
No, with the MNLF, of course, there are various ways by which they can cooperate in terms of this agreement. The Moro National Liberation Front had a final peace agreement in 1996. And some of their leaders have already joined Congress Some have run for governorships or local government posts. Some have remained, of course, as part of the MNLF bodies. So there are various ways by which they can also cooperate with this agreement.
Will the new entity be entrenched in your constitution, in the Philippines constitution?
As far as the government panel is concerned, we do not need to change the constitution to comply with every commitment that we made in terms of the agreement. And therefore, insofar as we are concerned, the commitments that we have is entrenched or accommodated in the constitution.
You've had peace deals before. What makes this one different?
This one, I should say this one is more practical and comprehensive. Insofar as the MILF is concerned, yes, there have been a few agreements with them. But of course, it covered different aspects. There is an agreement on the general cessation of hostilities, and then an agreement setting up an elaborate ceasefire mechanism, which is actually working on the ground. Since the beginning of this year, there have been no skirmishes between government and MILF forces. Then there was the agreement with the MILF on rehabilitation and several other minor agreements with them. There was, of course, the Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, which was declared unconstitutional by our Supreme Court during the last administration. So this agreement is more comprehensive in the sense that it now paves the way for a roadmap of a final political settlement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Thus, the provisions on decommissioning, thus the provisions on the transfer of law enforcement from the armed forces of the Philippines to the Philippine National Police.
Any more questions?
What do you see as the single biggest challenge now? Is it going to be on the political powers sharing side, the wealth sharing? Is there one area that's going to be quite particularly challenging?
The challenge is always that the parties continue to build trust amongst each other. So a signed agreement does not mean that there will be immediate peace, but a signed agreement paves the way for each of the sides to actually show that it can be trusted, that it can actually comply with its promises, that institutions will indeed be changed. As far as government is concerned, you've heard the speech of the President, and he has brought his entire cabinet on board to meet the commitments that we have made across the negotiating table. With respect to the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, we are confident that the current leadership has negotiated with us in good faith and that we have to build it. These processes are not easy. The agreement only heralds a change of the status of the parties vis-a-vis each other, from enemies, perhaps, to partners that may be at the start critical of each other, but then as they move along, meeting challenge upon challenge and building trust and finding creative solutions, they would be able to forge ahead and finally bring some sort of normalization or normal conditions within the area.
Just to clarify, you said October 15th is the date you must sign this framework?
October 15 is the date being suggested to sign the agreement.
The elections will be in 2016.
The elections in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao, which is the current setup, will continue in May of 2013. The regular elections of the Bangsamoro, which is the new political entity, which is within the Republic of the Philippines, it is in an autonomous relationship with the Republic of the Philippines, will be in May of 2016.
Sorry, did you address the question of what is the period of transition? What is the period of transition?
The period of transition depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about the Transition Commission, whose role is to draft a Bangsamoro Basic Law, it is on the schedule of the Transition Commission. But in the agreement, what we are hoping to have is a Bangsamoro Basic Law before the end of the administration. This administration ends in 2016, which means that if we work backwards, there has to be a law that is passed and ratified by the people prior to that. And then after that, of course, regular elections in 2016.
Now, what happens during the transition?
During the transition, governance shall be done by the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao until a new law repeals or modifies or abolishes the current Organic Act, in which case then therefore we start to establish the kinds of transition mechanisms that are essential to build a ministerial form of government in an autonomous relationship with the Republic of the Philippines. And within the Republic, I should say.
No more? Okay. Very makasih. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat.